November 1944. The stifling air of the prisoner of war camp in the Philippines weighed heavily on every breath. I, a Japanese woman barely in my 20s, was marched forward in line, my bare feet pressing into the damp, musty ground. My steps felt unbearably heavy, and I had no idea where they were taking me. What echoed in my head were the chilling rumors I had heard in recent days. Before a prisoner is executed, they are given a final kindness, fed until full, bathed and made clean, so they leave this world in a proper state. The thought made me shiver violently, my heart pounding so hard it felt as if it might leap out of my chest. When the heavy iron door creaked open, I stepped into a small room with a low tin roof, dimly lit by a single yellow bulb dangling above. A strange fragrance hit my nose, sweet, floral, familiar, yet long forgotten. In the corner stood a gray steel tub filled with steaming water that sent a faint mist rising into the air. POWs. On a wooden stool beside it lay a bar of pure white soap, neatly wrapped in thin, crisp paper. I froze, my feet rooted to the floor. Was this the final act of mercy? An American soldier motioned for me to remove my tattered clothes, drenched with sweat and dirt. In his hand was a thick white towel, so soft and clean it looked like a luxury meant for another world. I hesitated, my fingers trembling, my mind spinning with fear. Perhaps the moment I finish bathing, they will march me out and shoot me. Perhaps this is nothing more than the ritual before death. I glanced back at the women behind me. Their eyes were vacant, caught between relief and terror. Not a word was spoken. They handed me a small basin to scoop the water. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes and slowly poured the warm water over my frail body. Steam rose thick around me, wrapping me in a shroud. The sensation, I could not remember when I had last felt it. The hot water streamed down my roughened skin, washing away the grime that had clung for endless months. I picked up the bar of soap and rubbed it lightly across my hand. Instantly, a delicate fragrance spread, fresh, pure, gentle, so different from the harsh ash soap I once shared with my whole family. White foam blossomed on my skin, soft and tender, leaving me bewildered. I felt embarrassed, yet at the same time enchanted, as though I had stepped into an impossible dream. Is this real? Or are they mocking me before they kill me? The question echoed again and again in my head. I clenched my eyes shut, feeling every stream of water, my chest tight with a choking fear. To be this clean felt almost painful, as if such purity existed only to prepare me for a cruel ending. And yet, when I opened my eyes, what unfolded before me was nothing like the nightmare I had imagined. In that moment, standing with a bar of white soap in my trembling hand, a seed was planted deep within me, a seed of an entirely different truth, a truth I had never dared to imagine. As the lather slid across my skin, memories from home rushed back to me, cutting through the rising steam like a cold wind. I thought of Kyoto in the late 1930s, when Nishiki Market was still alive with the fragrance of fresh rice and the cries of mothers selling their wares with children slung over their backs. Back then, we had no idea that war would soon devour everything. By 1943, life was no longer the same. Every morning I woke with an empty stomach, my daily rice ration reduced to barely a handful, less than 6 ounces meant to last an entire day. We were given dried sweet potatoes and bland flour to mix into our rice, called substitute rice, but no one ever felt full. My mother often pretended she had eaten at the market so she could give her share to me and my younger sister. I knew it was a lie, but I swallowed the tiny portion in silence, tears mingling with each grain. Clothing, too, became a burden. The kimono I once cherished had been cut short and stitched into work clothes. My wooden sandals, their heels worn flat, were patched again and again with scraps of rubber from old tires. Loudspeakers on every street corner blared the same slogans day after day. Sacrifice for the emperor is the greatest glory. Sisters, save your cosmetics, for true beauty comes from patriotic spirit. Posters urged women to abandon makeup and hairstyles, branding them as wasteful indulgences unworthy of a nation at war. At school, we were taught that America was starving. Textbooks described how Hollywood sets were being dismantled for steel to build tanks, while American children grew thin and hollow-bellied. I devoured these lessons as absolute truth. In my mind, America was a dying giant, while Japan, despite hunger and shortages, stood proud with the unbreakable Yamato spirit. But the reality around me told a different story. My neighbors, a family of 4, were so starved that their young son collapsed in the street. At home, we mix kitchen ash with water as detergent, its grit biting into our skin. Even soap, so ordinary once, had become a luxury. Our family owned just one dull gray bar, hardened with ash and fat, as rough as stone. We all shared it, grinding it down little by little until nothing remained but useless crumbs. Each night, my father sat hunched over the abacus under the dim oil lamp. He had been a small silk merchant, but once the government seized control of production for the war effort, supplies vanished. His shop closed, and our family sank into hardship. Wanting to help, I volunteered for the Women's National Service Corps, believing I would serve as a nurse or mechanic, aiding soldiers in my country. In my heart still flickered the belief that if we endured enough suffering, Japan would triumph, and we would be honored. But when the air raids began to thunder overhead, I realized spirit alone could not shield us from bombs. We huddled in shelters, clutching one another, sirens wailing above as the night sky blazed with fire. And still, our lips were forced to shout, "Long live Japan!" I saw children, faces smudged with soot, trembling in the dark, and I wondered, were the Americans, supposedly starving, on the brink of collapse, cowering in fear as we were? Or had we been fed lies? The day I left Japan, I left behind my mother with her dwindling basket of goods and my frail sister, and I still believed I was bound for service, to heal soldiers, to give my hands to the empire. I could not have imagined that my journey would end in a prisoner of war camp. And yet here I was, standing in foreign captivity, holding a pristine bar of soap in my hand, a luxury my homeland could no longer offer me. That bar of soap, so small and unassuming, cut a sharp line between truth and falsehood. It revealed how many years of my life had been spent inside a carefully constructed illusion. The thunder of artillery roared across the sky, tearing it open. I remember that day vividly. October 1944, when the Battle of Leyte began. Black plumes of smoke curled upward in the distance. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and the air grew thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder. We women, brought here under the pretense of medical support, quickly realized there were no hospitals, no proper beds, only makeshift shacks, and the agonized cries of wounded soldiers sprawled across the muddy earth. We were given no syringes, no real medicine. All we had were strips of torn cloth and a few nearly empty bottles of antiseptic. At night, flares split the sky, illuminating our gaunt faces with their harsh light. In those moments, I began to understand. The promise of glory in service to the nation was nothing but a veil, a cruel disguise for the truth. We were pawns, sacrificed in a war spiraling toward despair. Then came the pounding of boots. The Americans had arrived. We scrambled to flee, but there was nowhere to run, surrounded by jungle, gunfire, and chaos. Tall figures emerged before us, helmets gleaming, rifles raised. My body shook, my mind went blank, and a single thought echoed. This is the moment. They will execute us now. But the moment unfolded nothing like I imagined. One American lowered his rifle and motioned for us to sit. In his eyes, I did not see the savage cruelty our textbooks had painted. Instead, there was caution, mixed with something like hesitation. A nurse in white stepped forward, accompanied by a Japanese interpreter. His voice trembled as he translated, "You are not prisoners to be executed. You will be taken to a camp. You will be fed. You will be cared for." We stared at each other in disbelief. None of us trusted it. I clutched the torn collar of my uniform, bracing for the shot that would surely come. But instead of gunfire, I heard another sound, the hiss of tin lids being pried open. A soldier placed a small can in my lap. Inside was pink salted meat, its savory aroma rising to my nose. My stomach clenched. I dared not eat, convinced it was a trick. But then I saw another woman shove a piece into her mouth, tears streaming as the rich taste overwhelmed her. My chest tightened. It was the first meat I had seen in 2 years, after surviving only on dried sweet potatoes and thin porridge. The next day we were transported to a field camp. Rows of canvas tents lined the ground, American soldiers moving briskly about. Each step I took was careful, bracing for betrayal, for the moment the illusion would shatter. But no, there were no beatings, no interrogations. Instead, we were handed trays, soft white bread, golden butter, and coffee sweetened with condensed milk. Sachiko, one of the women in our group, burst into sobs as she bit into the bread. "In Japan," she cried, "I haven't seen white bread in 2 years." That night, I lay beneath a thick blanket they had given me, my hands gripping a metal spoon, still scented faintly of butter. Sleep would not come. In my head, the question spun relentlessly. Is this the final kindness? After feeding us, after dressing us decently, will they lead us outside to be shot? Fear still hung heavy, like the darkness around me. And yet, deep in my heart, a fragile spark had begun to glow, the suspicion that perhaps, just perhaps, not everything we had been taught about the Americans was true. In those early days at the camp, I lived in a strange, unreal fog, half dream, half nightmare. Each morning, the American soldiers carried in trays of food I had not seen for years. A slice of soft white bread, pillowy and warm, smeared with golden butter, a spoonful of deep red jam glinting in the sun. Beside it, a neat square of salted meat, a small can of fruit preserved in syrup, and a steaming cup of coffee with condensed milk. I stared at the tray, afraid to touch it, convinced it must be a temporary trick. Yet the smell, the butter, the sweet coffee, awakened the hollow in my stomach. When I swallowed the first bite, tears came to my eyes. I could not believe that I, a prisoner, was being treated like this. The contrast was almost unbearable. Back home in Japan, my family had shared a single bowl of rice mixed with sweet potato, passing the scant grains around, measuring out the salt in tiny pinches. And here, a guard casually tossed half a slice of bread into the trash as if it were nothing. I watched it fall and felt my chest tighten. Was this display of plenty meant to break our spirits? Or was America truly so wealthy that what we regarded as luxury was nothing more than waste to them? On the third day, they gave me a small kit of personal items. When I opened it, I was stunned. A blue plastic toothbrush with clean white bristles, a finely toothed comb that shone when it caught the light, a towel so thick and plush it must have cost a small fortune where I came from, and most astonishing of all, a bar of soap with a gentle floral scent. I handled it like a relic. I remembered the single blunt wooden brush my whole family had shared for years. Now, everyone had their own, and we were being given towels and soap as if they were as common as the air. I could hardly believe it. I whispered to the interpreter, "Must we give these back when we are done?" "Che." He smiled and shook his head. "No," he said, "they're yours." That night I held the soap to my chest like a child clutching a single doll. I feared that in the morning everything would have disappeared, and I would be back in Kyoto's damp, dark pit. One woman in our tent secreted half a dry slice of bread under her pillow because she could not bring herself to believe there would be more. Scarcity had soaked into our bones. We could not accept abundance, even when it stood before us. On the 5th day, they took us to the camp washroom. What I saw there is a scene I will never forget. Hot water streaming from a tap the instant you turned it. No need to heat it over a fire. Steam filled the room, softening the light. An American nurse handed me a clear glass bottle. "Shampoo," she said, smiling. I did not understand the word at first. All I knew was that the clear liquid, when rubbed into my hair, foamed into white lather and filled my scalp with a sweet fragrance. I shivered with a strange mix of joy and embarrassment. My whole life my mother had used ash water to wash both our clothes and our hair. And yet here was something made just for hair. While I was still trembling from the novelty, another sight stopped me cold. A soldier finished shaving and tossed half a bar of soap into the wastebasket. I darted forward, snatched it up, and hid it inside my tunic. When the interpreter asked why, I said, "In Japan, women may walk all day just to find a scrap of soap like this." He looked at me, said nothing, and walked away. I understood then, to the Americans, what we treated as a treasure was mere refuse. That night I lay awake, turning the events over in my mind. I remembered the loudspeakers and the lessons at school. The Americans are starving, desperate, collapsing. Yet in my hands were a thick towel, a brand new toothbrush, and a fragrant bar of soap. In my stomach was salted meat, butter, and milky coffee. Each of these things felt like a blade striking through the wall of belief I had spent my whole life building. If these things were real, then how many other truths I had been raised with were simply lies? Slowly, a seed of doubt took root. It crept into my thoughts like the scent of that soap, small and persistent. The comforts around me were not theater. They were material evidence, repeated, ordinary, and consistent. That was the most dangerous thing of all. When scarcity is presented as honor and poverty as virtue, nothing shatters more painfully than the moment you are shown that the world can be otherwise. That day, they led me into a separate room in the camp. The guard motioned me inside and closed the door. Before me stood a steel tub, steam curling off its brim in pale wisps. On a small wooden shelf sat a bar of white soap, immaculate and wrapped, and beside it a towel so thick and plush I could have mistaken it for a blanket. I froze, my heart hammering. The old rumor rose up in my mind. A prisoner is cleansed and fed before execution, so they leave the world in proper order. My hand shook as I peeled off the tattered layers of clothing, feeling at once exposed and ashamed. Hot water roared from the tap and splashed, finding its way into the cuts and scrapes on my skin. I flinched. How long had it been since anything warm touched me? In Japan, even a single pot of hot water to bathe the whole family had become a luxury during the war. And yet here, in this prison camp, I was standing over a tub filled with steaming water meant only for me. I picked up the bar of soap. It was smooth and cool in my palm, and the scent was gentle, floral, the kind of smell that reminded me of the little garden behind my childhood home. I turned it over, half in disbelief, half in fear. Is this the last kindness before they kill me? I asked myself, my throat tight. Slowly, I closed my eyes, breathed in, and rubbed the soap lightly across my forearm. Immediately, a fine white lather bloomed and spread, coating my sun-darkened skin with a softness I had not known in years. The lather slid and bubbled, and my body felt strangely tender under it, so clean it hurt. Hot tears tracked down my face and mixed with the running water, but I did not know whether I was crying from relief or terror. I thought of my mother and sister back in Kyoto, probably scrubbing clothes in ash water and shivering with cold. And here I was, a defeated prisoner, being scrubbed with fragrant soap and enveloped in warmth. The reversal felt cruel. It made me ashamed, as if I were betraying them by enjoying something they could not have. Foam covered me in white patches. The scent filled the small room, sweet, almost comforting, yet so at odds with everything I had been taught. I remembered a teacher's lecture. Americans are uncivilized, dirty creatures who don't know purity. And yet these same people were giving me a kind of cleanliness my country could not provide. With each stroke of the soap, I washed away months of grime, and with each stroke a childish, unquestioning faith I had carried since youth was scrubbed thin and fragile. I was literally scrubbing at the pieces of myself that had been formed by lies. When I bent over and looked into the water, the reflection made me pause. A gaunt face stared back, cheeks hollowed, eyes ringed with shadow. But the whiteness of the foam seemed to brighten it, as if light were returning to that face. I hadn't seen myself clearly in years. No mirror, no proper light, no proper. Now in that little pool, I saw someone both familiar and foreign. A prisoner, yes, but also a person tasting comforts that my homeland had taken away. Trembling, I touched my cheek and whispered, "Is this me?" After I rinsed, the nurse wrapped the thick towel around me. Its softness pressed against my skin like an embrace. I wanted to bury my face in it and sob like a child. The American nurse smiled and handed me a comb, demonstrating with gentle motions how to untangle my hair. I mimicked her, clumsy at first, fingers fumbling through knots that had been neglected for years. Slowly my hair loosened, smoothing and shining faintly, giving off that gentle scent. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt less like a prisoner and more like a human being. Yet that fragile happiness came tethered to a sharp anxiety. As I stepped out of the bath, I scanned the doorway, expecting, half convinced, that someone would seize me and drag me out to die. There was no such fate. Instead, they handed me a bowl of warm porridge and a slice of soft bread. My hands trembled as I ate. Every bite was comfort braided with torment. Why would anyone lavish such care on someone they called an enemy? Why such towels, soap, hot water, good food, if the intent was to kill? That question gnawed at me, a small persistent ache that grew with every hour. If this was not a prelude to death, then what did it mean? Were these acts of kindness simply strange exceptions, Or were they evidence of something else entirely, something I had not been allowed to see before? The thought frightened me more than the idea of being shot did. That night I lay awake on the cot, the scent of soap still clinging to my skin like a ghost. It was an undeniable proof that what I had experienced was real. I thought of the years of scarcity back home, of the propaganda blaring from loudspeakers, the slogans we chanted without question. A single bar of soap, so small and unassuming, had cracked that wall wide open. I realized then that I had not only scrubbed dirt from my body, I had scrubbed away a part of the distorted memory that had filled me since childhood. This moment marked a turning point, not of the war perhaps, but of my life. Standing there wrapped in a towel, smelling of soap, I understood that an entirely different way of seeing the world had been set into motion inside me. The truth whispered itself in the suds. Appearances and slogans could be broken by simple, repeated acts of ordinary care. And once that crack appeared, there would be no going back to the woman who had walked in fearing the final kindness. After that first bath with soap, I thought I had reached the peak of astonishment, but in the days that followed, I realized it was only the beginning. What I witnessed in the camp dug deeper and deeper into my mind, each small detail cutting into the crumbling wall of belief I had once thought unshakable. In the mornings, we were given the same breakfast as the American soldiers: golden fried eggs, strips of crisp bacon, white bread smeared with butter, fruit jam glistening red in the light, and a cup of coffee sweetened with sugar. I had once thought a bowl of thin rice gruel was a stroke of luck, and yet here, meat and eggs appeared every single day as if they were nothing special. One morning I saw a female American soldier set down half an apple, then toss it casually into the trash. I froze where I stood, a sharp pain gripping my chest. In Kyoto, my mother had once divided a single shriveled persimmon into 4 pieces for the family, treating it as a rare treasure. Here, a perfectly round apple was discarded like refuse. It wasn't only the food. Even the smallest items left me stunned. One afternoon, a nurse handed me a brand new pair of socks, white, thick, and soft. I couldn't stop stroking the fabric, thinking of the old pair back home that I had patched and mended 10 times. Those socks had been my pride at school, though they were little more than threadbare scraps by the end. I asked the interpreter timidly, "Do I have to return these?" She laughed. "No, they're yours. When they wear out, you'll get another." I stood there speechless. Back home, an entire family might share one pair of socks, patching and patching until they disintegrated. Yet here, replacement was automatic, effortless. Another day, I saw American soldiers unloading crates from a truck, dozens of them, filled with identical new boots, the leather still rich with the scent of tanning. A woman in our group, once a mathematics teacher, began counting softly under her breath. Then she whispered, "Just here, over 5,000 pairs." She fell silent, eyes blank. I knew what she was calculating. If the Americans could produce and distribute thousands of boots to a single small camp, then their industrial power was far beyond anything we had been taught. This was undeniable truth, staring us in the face. But what shocked me most was the waste. I once watched an American nurse wash her face and then toss half a bar of soap into the trash. Instinctively, I rushed to retrieve it, dried it, and hid it in my clothing. When the interpreter asked why, I said simply, "In Japan, a woman might walk all day just to find a scrap of soap no larger than a fingertip." Iki, she fell silent. I felt like a thief, yet at the same time, like someone rescuing a jewel from being thrown away. To me, Their garbage was more valuable than any storeroom back home. I secretly gathered empty tin cans, scrubbed them clean, and kept them. In my eyes, each one could become a container for rice, a small pot for boiling food, or even a piece of roofing for a leaking house. To them, it was waste. To me, it was survival. The shame burned inside me, but so did the bitter realization. Had all of our sacrifices and suffering been for nothing but lies? Once I was led into the medical storeroom. There, behind glass, stood refrigerators filled with vials of clear liquid. An American doctor opened one, pulled out a vial, and said through the interpreter, "Penicillin, even for small wounds." My body went cold. I had watched Japanese soldiers die slowly from infections because we had no such medicine. And here, they had enough to use on a cut finger. I bit my lip until it bled. The vaunted Yamato spirit, celebrated as our ultimate weapon, suddenly seemed a cruel, mocking joke. Day after day, the discoveries piled up like waves crashing over me. A glance at the dining hall, a crate unloaded from a truck, an object casually discarded. Each was another piece of living, undeniable evidence. We could no longer fool ourselves into thinking this was a staged show to weaken our morale. No, this was reality. The Americans were so abundant, so wasteful, that they scorned what we considered precious treasures. And that reality was a sentence, a verdict passed upon Japan itself, a nation bleeding its people dry, wringing them of sweat and hunger, only to find it could never match its enemy. After weeks in the camp, I began to understand that the fear of execution after a full meal, after a clean bath, had been nothing more than an illusion. But what replaced it was far worse, the hollow emptiness when every belief I had once clung to slowly collapsed. At night, I often sat in the corner of the tent, staring at a sheet of paper and a dull pencil the Americans had given us to write letters home after the war ended. Those letters would never be sent, but I wrote them anyway because it was the only way to keep my mind from breaking apart. "Dearest Mother," I wrote with trembling hand, "you will not believe this. I have bathed in hot water with fragrant soap. They give me meat, soft white bread. They give me my own toothbrush, my own towel, and yet back in Kyoto, you must still be boiling thin gruel, still giving your portion to my sister. I am ashamed, Mother. I am a prisoner, and yet I live in more comfort than my own family." A tear smeared the paper, the words bleeding like an open wound. On other nights, I wrote to my old teacher, "You once taught us that America was collapsing, that its people were starving, that it would kneel before the strength of Japan's spirit. But here, they throw away what our people cannot even dream of. They toss half an apple into the trash while our villages cannot find a single piece of fresh fruit. Teacher, were you deceived too? Or did you know the truth and still feed us lies?" Sometimes anger surged in me like fire. I raged against the men in Tokyo, shouting for sacrifice while their people starved, while women like me were sent to the front with empty promises. Once I had called myself proudly a heroine in service to the nation. Now I saw myself as nothing more than a pawn, moved and discarded by men of power. The deepest wound was not defeat at the hands of the enemy, but the realization that my own homeland had betrayed us first. In those days, I watched the other women closely. Some sat in silence for hours, eyes vacant. Others refused to eat, as though denying that the enemy could provide what home never could. Some broke down in tears at the sight of chocolate or a new pair of shoes. We no longer argued with one another. We all knew any words defending Japan were no more than rags trying to cover an obvious, gaping truth. I remember one night a friend whispered to me, "Perhaps we are already dead, and this is another world." I looked at her, unsure whether to nod or shake my head. Deep inside, I too sometimes wished to believe that the thick towels, the buttered bread, the gleaming vials of medicine were illusions, a dream from which I would wake to find myself back in Kyoto, listening to the loudspeakers telling us Japan would surely win. But no, this was reality, and it was this reality that was slowly killing us. The letters multiplied. To my mother, my sister, my childhood friend, my teacher, even to myself. I folded them and tucked them under my pillow, knowing they would never reach the hands for whom they were written. But I wrote them to confess to myself that I had seen, touched, smelled, and eaten what we had always called the enemies. And I had come to know that everything I had believed for so many years was nothing but a wall of lies. Some nights I dreamed of returning to Kyoto, running to my mother, placing in her hand a bar of pure white soap, telling her, "Mother, the Americans are not what we thought. They are strong, they are abundant, they do not see us as garbage. You must believe me." But when I awoke, my hand clutched only empty air, cold and stiff. I knew then that no one back home would believe my words until they saw for themselves. And that truth, this unbearable truth, was what hurt most of all, the knowledge that reality itself was trapped here with us, locked away inside the letters that would never be sent. As time passed, I began to notice that even my body was changing day by day, living proof of a truth I had once tried so hard to deny. When I first arrived at the camp, I was nothing but skin and bone, my cheeks hollow, my hair falling out so badly that patches of my scalp showed through. Every step I took was heavy, trembling, as if I might collapse at any moment. But after months of being properly fed, I started to gain weight. My skin regained color, my cheeks filled out, and my black hair grew back thicker, carrying a sheen of life I thought I had lost forever. For the first time in years, I looked into a foggy mirror in the washroom and saw a woman with bright eyes staring back, not the gaunt shadow I had been. It wasn't only my body that changed. My spirit began to shift as well. At first, I lived in constant fear of being executed, fear of being deceived. Yet as the days went by and no death ever came, that fear quieted, replaced by something else, bewilderment, then curiosity. I began to watch more closely, to ask myself why the Americans could live with such abundance. Tentatively, I asked to learn a few English words, naming the objects around me, repeating their sounds like a child learning to speak. What surprised me most was that the Americans, the very people I had once believed were demons, took the time to teach me. A nurse showed me how to tie a strap properly. A guard corrected me gently, saying soap, instead of letting me point to the bar in silence. Another chuckled softly when I mispronounced a word, not with cruelty, but with patience. These tiny gestures planted something new within me, the sense that I was no longer just an enemy, but a human being who could learn, communicate, and be met with kindness. Among the women in my group, many still refused to accept it. They clung to the belief that everything we saw was a staged performance. But I knew the truth was written on my own body. My skin no longer looked gray, my gums no longer ached thanks to a toothbrush and paste, and the dizzy spells from hunger had vanished. No performance could thicken the blood in my veins, steady my step, or make my face plump again in the mirror. Only reality itself could bring about such changes. And then one morning, As I stepped out of the washroom with my hair still fragrant with soap and the sun shining across the camp yard, I realized something. I was no longer the woman who had entered here trembling in fear on that first day. I was still a prisoner, still far from home, but I had escaped a larger prison, the prison of lies. The transformation in my body and spirit was undeniable evidence that a new truth had begun. Looking back on that journey, I realized that war does not only kill with bombs and bullets, but also with the lies planted deep in the minds of ordinary people. We, Japanese women, grew up believing America was poor, barbaric, and merciless toward prisoners of war. Yet the truth I witnessed with my own eyes was entirely different. They fed us, clothed us, gave us medicine, and above all, they gave us a bar of fragrant soap to bathe with, a small act that was powerful enough to change an entire worldview. That moment when I stood beneath the hot water, holding the white bar of soap, it was not only my body that was cleansed of filth, it was my mind that was washed free of years of propaganda. I came to understand that America's true strength lay not only in its weapons or its atomic bombs, but in its ability to preserve humanity even in the midst of war, to grant an enemy cleanliness, to grant them the dignity of still feeling human. When Japan announced its surrender, I did not cry for my nation's defeat. I thought only of my mother and sister, wishing they too might one day hold such a bar of soap, so they could understand that the world outside was not what we had been taught to believe. From that moment on, I knew war may divide borders, but truth and humanity are the bridges that connect us. And perhaps if there is one lesson that remains after all of this, it is the simplest one I carry with me always. Sometimes a bar of soap, something so small, so ordinary, can prove more powerful than the roar of cannons, for it cleanses not only the dirt from the skin, but also the illusions that imprison the soul. If this story made you reflect on the hidden truths behind war, don't forget to subscribe and share this video so others may also know. There are many more untold stories we will bring to you in the episodes to come.